Is it possible to 3D print a full-sized historic arcade machine? We asked this question on our sister channel Arcade Archive last month, and Richard got to work on designing, printing and constructing a replica of the first commercially available arcade video game, Computer Space, from 1971. It was an impressive build, certainly the largest 3D print I've ever seen, but there's much to do to finish it today. And we've got new techniques to test out, techniques that we've been told are impossible to do. Sounds like a challenge to me. If you haven't seen part 1, then follow the link in the video description to see the design process, the tools that are used, all the way through to the big reveal, as Rich has been doing this in secret, and then he surprised us with it. Oh, look at that! So let's finish it up today and see if we can make it look and play like the original Computer Space, and create ourselves a wonderful exhibit so that visitors can try out some video game history for themselves.
Hello cave dwellers and indeed Arcadians. We are here for Computer Space Part 2, and that may confuse you if you're watching on my channel, because Part 1 happened over on the Arcade Archive channel, our sister channel, because this really is a project that traverses the whole mill, doesn't it, and the whole retro collective.
Absolutely.
Joined here by Richard, again, from Heber Limited. And you've given a lot of your time to this project, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a labour of love, but I've totally enjoyed it from start to finish. So yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for everything you've done. And thank you as well to Heber for loaning us, Richard. If you don't know about Heber, they're just about to celebrate their 40th year in the industry, and also are focusing recently on retro products, aren't you?
Yes, we are, yeah. Producing retro gaming product systems and all sorts of different accessories.
Yep, so check out their shop for things like the control dock, multi-system cases. What else have you got on there?
Aegon Console 8, which is good, yeah.
Of course, how could I forget that? So go and check that out. But now we're going to focus in on Computer Space Part 2, and there's a huge amount of work, and it will be finished by the end of today's episode. You're going to see it in all its glory, and it is an incredible sight to see. And now we go into removing the blue tack, because there was blue tack involved at the end of Part 1, making this a solid build, and taking this to completion. So we join Richard in the workshop.
I'm going to need a nice solid wooden base for these 3D printed sections to be glued and screwed onto. Then I can build all the other sections on top, then get onto the sanding, filling and smoothing of the outside surface. The original Computer Space cabinet was quite organic and fluid with its lines as well as its construction. By using the fiberglass frame, the wooden base and the wooden back, all of the fiberglass is lapped over onto those wooden sections. So I'm going to use this in a similar way with the 3D printing sections, keeping the edges quite rough and cut to flow the edges of the machine, and then try and lap that in with some resin to try and blend it into the base and to the back of the wood. I'm just going to add a little bit more grip adhesive on the inside to seal the first 3D printed section to the base. That's going to need at least 48 hours to dry, then we can move on to the next layers.
So you're putting the first section on here, Richard. You've drilled the first section to the base, and then the next layer that goes on top of that. How are you securing that layer to the first layer?
So I'm using instant bond adhesive, which does actually allow you to move the layers around, and that's really quite useful for registration, just making sure you've got them all lined up and stacked on top of each other. So you do have to let them dry, each layer, because otherwise they will slide around a bit. Okay. But the base is very important to get a nice solid base, so that's wood. Yeah.
And then we find you on the inside here. What are you doing here? You've got gauze and filler going in?
Yeah, that's really just to strengthen up all of the layers, because a lot of strength went into each layer section, but I'm just strengthening the inside layers with fiberglass tape that you would use in plastering. And then I will apply more filler to the whole cabinet from top to bottom.
And the goal is to cover the whole thing in filler, yeah?
Yes, yeah, you get a nice solid surface then that's all the same, so anything you put on it is going to react in the same way. So yeah, it's good. And it means you don't have to do so much sanding, because filler is very easy to sand. PLA, 3D printed plastic, is definitely not easy to sand.
And now around the back of the cabinet, there's some woodwork going on. So moved on from PLA, what are you doing here?
So I'm cutting out the back door really, and the fiberglass original cabinet actually lapped around that door, and then the door was cut into that back section. It was just cut with a jigsaw, so virtually every computer space that you see is a little bit wonky. So I did it with a jigsaw as well.
Can't get it wrong.
No,
It's
you
a
can't.
replica.
It's absolutely right, yeah.
Each one is unique. And then you've got a monitor shelf going in, and you've even used a particular hinge on the door. Why have you chosen these ones?
Yes, they used basic gate hinges. So all of the computer spaces just have small black gate hinges. So I tried to measure up and get the same size, and used exactly as per the original.
And then finally you created more internal support. Presumably that's for the monitor shelf to go on those bits of wood that are going in there.
That's right. Actually, when I was designing the model, I actually put sections in because I knew I was going to use 1.5 inch box section wood to actually have pieces that went up onto a shelf, and then all of the weight would be pushed down onto that wooden base. So there's not too much weight going onto the PLA. Again, I think that was a question that people put in the comments in the first video, that they were worried about the weight onto the PLA. It's actually very strong, but adding that extra sections just ensures that you're not going to get any compression at all.
Also a couple of comments concerned about the heat from the monitor. Was that a concern to you?
Oh, absolutely not. PLA is really, really good with that, and it's actually covered inside and out, and it really won't get very hot at all inside. The deflection temperature of PLA is pretty good, so yeah, you're not going to have any problems with that at all.
There's a lot more to do now to the cabinet to get it ready for painting, but we'll come back to the prep of the cabinet because this is a really interesting bit for me. This is something that they said couldn't be done, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of research with resin experts, and there's a lot of them on YouTube. So there's some really good people doing great things with resin. Reached out to a few people to ask, how do you do this? How do you do this on boats? How do you do this on walls? How do you do this on kitchen cabinets? All sorts of things. And the general advice, especially when you're trying to add something like glitter or any other finishes, is that, it has to be flat, really, because resin wants to self-level and also fall off. So fall off any edges. So everyone said, don't do it on a vertical surface, it will all just fall off.
I really wanted to try resin because the original machine was coated in resin when it was in the mold, so the gel coat had resin and glitter. Sometimes it just had a resin and a colour coat. Not all of them were glittered. The yellow one wasn't, for example, neither was the white. After talking to a lot of people, the general opinion was that trying to coat this in resin with either spraying it or painting it isn't really that viable. So everyone says, don't do it, it's going to be a bad idea. Basically, just to try and find out whether that's valid and whether or not there's any chance of coating this in resin, whether it's in 3 sections, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 at the top, or whether we can just put it up like that, coat the whole thing in resin. I've got a few little test samples that I've worked out over here to try and give me some options. So the first sample I've got here, all of these little printouts have got filler on, apart from this one. This is just bare PLA, but they've all got filler on that I've used on the actual machine. So basically in the same condition that this little miniature model is in. This one I've sealed with PVA, which is clear PVA, and that's just water and PVA, so it's very thin down, so all it's done is sealed. That's bare PLA. This one's crystal clear matte finish varnish clear coat from Rust-Oleum, and I use this on all 3D printed models I want to try and protect. So I've used this for years and years and I know it works really well, so we've got that. This one's the bare, just filler only, because I want to see what happens whether the resin sinks in, whether there's issues with it that there isn't enough on the surface, or whether it stops it running off, because I'm going to move all of these to the vertical position, put all the resins on the horizontal, move them to vertical, and then just see what happens. We've got spray putty here. This is fantastic. So this is great for any rough surfaces that you want to be able to fills all the tiny little gaps and allows you to sand down. So I've used this on loads of 3D printed parts. My go-to primer is actually zinc primer. Zinc primer is absolutely fantastic. So I've done loads of 3D printed models with zinc primer, and you can actually polish this. You get a polished finish. All I've done on this one is just spray it on. So just want to see what happens. This is a new one for me. I've not used this one before. Rust-Oleum again, direct to plastic. It's really nice and bright white. So I love the finish that you've got from a white undercoat surface. We've got some standard undercoat paint on here, and then just for comparisons I've gone for a fluorescent blue, which is the Arcade Archive colours, a glossy red, which is pretty hideous, but I wanted to see what a different coloured backdrop would do to the glitter and finish of the resin. We've got a gesso and a silver just at the end, and then I've got a couple more other test samples that I'm actually going to keep flat, so I'm going to keep these two flat. This one was a crazy black filler that I've used that's actually got glitter on already, so I'm just going to put some resin over that. This one's just the same as this one, just filler only, and these two have just got white undercoat. So I'm going to keep these flat just as a comparison to what happens when you put them vertical or when you keep them flat. Got some glitters to try out, so we've got pure white and we've also got diamond laser, which has got a really nice sheeny sort of pearlescent type effect on it. Those two colours that I'm going to mix together to produce what looks very grey there, but hopefully when that's actually mixed into the resin and put on is going to be a really nice sparkly surface. So that's the theory behind it all, and soon we'll find out whether or not that's going to work. So I'm going to turn my scales on. I need to add 12.5 grams of resin part A. You want to be as accurate as possible when doing this, so it's useful to use the scales. We can do the first test now. So I'm basically going to just put on a little bit of resin onto my brush and get it on as thinly as possible, really. I just want this to just seal. Okay, that's looking good. And then we'll do the same on the reference test. And this really is just to give us something to reference. I did think about sprinkling the glitter on after putting the resin down, so this would be more like a glue and then sprinkle the glitter over it. But I'm really not sure how to do that on the massive machine. Probably just end up having a ton of glitter in the arcade or wherever I do this. So I think mixing it in with the resin is really the only viable option. Hopefully, we will soon find out. So that's actually gone on really well, and it's soaked. It's definitely soaked in. I can feel it soaking in. I can see it soaking in. Well, that's really interesting. Putting it on the bare PLA, it sort of wants to slide around until it soaks in a little bit, and then it gets a grip. That's really interesting. So it's very slidey, and then it sort of obviously finds the surface imperfections in the PLA, the printed PLA, and then it just wants to sit there in all the grooves. Will multiple coats be better? Thin coats? That's probably the right way to do it. Probably got less chance of it all falling off onto the floor. So I'm going to try and drag these up as much as I can, really. You can really feel the difference between the sealed version there and then the rough filler. So depending on how well these look at the end and whether or not it stays on or whether it falls off, could mean either sealing the machine before putting this on or not. Maybe the unsealed will actually work out better. Looks good on the spray putty. Always knew that was obviously going to come through because it is clear glitter. But it looks quite nice as a greyish background. Oh yeah, I do like that. That's interesting because zinc is my go-to finish for 3D prints that I want to just look really nice. The white finish, this is getting closer and closer to what I imagined we might end up with. Yeah, I do wonder whether this is all going to just fall off. It's very thin, very runny. Oh, it looks great on the blue actually. Wow, look at that. Yeah, I like the blue. Okay, moment of truth. Gonna put this one out and see what happens. I'll leave that one flat. And we'll see whether or not all that runs off. It's 24 hours later and we now have the results of our resin test with the glitter. So as you can see, all of the white samples didn't really come out as I hoped. I think these two, this was quite a bright gloss white finish and this one was a white undercoat finish, but they all look a little bit dirty and really just not very happy with them. So I think white really is looking like a non-starter. All of these different white samples just don't look great. The spray putty was interesting, but we did have some resin sliding down. We've got a couple of little drips there. The zinc primer was also fairly good. What was a real surprise was the blue and the red, and I really only put those on there as an experiment just to see, almost as a sort of a control, to see how bad they would look, but actually they look really good. So I'm really intrigued as to why we've got such a nice finish on those two, and every other finish really doesn't look that great. I'm starting to worry that our white glitter is actually not doing a very good job. I think actually what it's doing is it's thickening up the resin and causing it to be quite a rough surface finish. So I don't think it's actually doing anything for the aesthetic appearance and the luster that we're trying to get from sort of a nice sparkly glitter finish. And I think actually our diamond laser glitter is working very well. So I think that's doing all the heavy work on these ones, and actually everything else probably just clogs up. You can really see on the zinc primer one where it's just quite cloggy and just bumpy, and I think all that's done is maybe this is just PET flakes, or I don't think it's glass, but I think it's PET flakes, but I think all it's doing is absorbing into the resin and just making it thick. But this was a success, this test. People said you can't really put resin on a vertical surface because it'll all just run off. Well, actually, these two, there's not even any drips on this, and this is quite nice. It's got a very clear surface on there. So I think we can prove that actually we might be able to do this cabinet if we lay it down this way and actually put the resin on and allow it to basically fall off. Those were never going to be viable options. That's too bright blue and that's too fire truck red. So they're not really nice options. But I have come up with a midnight blue, which might be a nice option. So I think that's the next one I'm going to try and see whether or not we can do. That's just a matte finish, but once it's got the resin on, it will be shinier.
So how long did these experiments take?
This whole process took around 4 or 5 days, so I was really pleased to have cracked the colour and hopefully the formula to allow me to apply this to the cabinet. I decided that's the formula, blue glitter and a little bit of tint. I tried it with diamond in as well, and so we have blue and diamond glitter. I decided on which one to use when it dried.
And which did you decide on, Richard, when it dried?
Yeah, so I decided to go for the blue glitter and a little bit of diamond. So it was about 2/3 blue glitter and 1/3 diamond glitter, because that gave a really nice shiny finish.
Mm-hmm. So Richard's picked the colour, he's picked the formula, but we need a surface to apply this to find out if it's going to work or if it's just going to slop off of the cabinet, as many have predicted will happen.
Yeah.
So it was all hands to the cabinet, and we began sanding and prepping. The objective here then was to sand down the filler and get a smooth shape, and everyone at the collective got involved for the final push here. We got it pretty smooth, but that glitter, it will actually help to distract from any imperfections, won't it? A little bit.
It will, yes, definitely. It will fill in a little bit of those, any tiny bumps and cracks in there, yeah.
And there it is after sanding. And then Richard puts the first layer of paint on. What kind of paint are you using here?
Actually, just before the paint, I did actually seal it. So I decided in my resin tests, I decided that it needed a seal. So I just used a very thin layer of sealant that's mixed with water. So that just sealed the surface before I put the paint on.
Mm-hmm. And then what kind of paint was that?
It's actually the blue, midnight blue was just emulsion paint. So that is literally just standard emulsion paint. Yeah, okay. Again, in different computer space cabinets, you see different holes, and I think what happened is they were having some ventilation problems, and a lot of the later computer space cabinets have 3 holes on each side above the serial number plaque. So I decided, why not do that on ours, because a lot of them have got those holes.
And then, like a rocket being transported to its launch pad, it leaves the workshop and it goes into the warmth of the arcade for the resin application, because you want it fairly warm in there, don't you, for this application?
Yeah, 25 degrees C, so I did put it in there and leave it for a few hours just to acclimatise.
And there's the patient there on the operating table, ready to go.
I'm just going to do the top, do the sides, do the other sides, and hope it all stays on and doesn't run off.
So I decided to do it in 200 millilitres or 200 grams.
And how many layers were you planning on putting on?
It's all going to be just one layer, but I did it in 3 sections. So I did one side, the top and front, and then the other side. This was all in that laying down position.
And talk us through the application. Are you using a makeup brush? Is that what that is?
I am, yes. I'm using a makeup brush. And this was a hint given on YouTube by a couple of different people. But they were doing tumblers, and it works really, really well because it doesn't leave any hairs and it just moves all the resin around lovely.
And you're using a process of almost dragging it up as you apply it.
That's right, yeah. You see sort of straight away that the glitter falls to the base, and actually after a little bit of time you realise you're moving the resin around and the glitter is settled and staying put, so it doesn't actually move around too much. I was delighted. I've got my full face mask on and I am smiling all the way through this process. I'm really, really delighted with it. It was just so much fun.
Well, you end with a big thumbs up there, so you look like you're pretty happy with yourself. And while it's drying, let's now consider a vital part of the machine, the control panel, which Dan at Retrified has been helping us with, and he'll just very quickly talk us through how he did that.
We could have just had the panel fabricated and printed using metal sheet, but I really wanted to keep with the theme of the whole project and see how far we could go using the materials and technologies that we already have on hand. This way it's far easier to experiment and see what works best. For the control panel, we didn't have any scans of an original, so I'm having to recreate it from the best reference photos I can find online. All of the graphics on the panel will be redrawn, so it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. For the main face, I chose a brushed metal foil which is printed with the finished graphics, then laminated with polycarbonate before the shape and holes are cut from the material. The laminate also dulls the brightness of the foil, which gets us closer to the look of the original. The button labels are then printed onto a thick polyester designed for backlighting. Once printed, it's then cut to shape and attached to the finished control panel, just like the screen printed original. And we're done.
I decided to use a little Arduino mainly because it connects to the electronics that we're going to put into the cabinet, and I can put all of the LED lighting and do all the adjustments I need inside that Arduino.
Mm-hmm. Dan also recreated the instructions for the game using an original plate as the source. That was sent in, kindly donated by Richard Chadd, so thank you for sending in that in, Richard. And we did debate putting the original plate in the cabinet, didn't we? And I think we're going to make up a plaque and a display next to it explaining what it is. And then that original plate will be in that framed display rather than in the cabinet.
Yeah, that's right. Because we've got the original flyer, and now with that original plaque, it would be quite nice to put that in to explain the reason why we have the replica of the computer space.
And you can see Richard here testing that control panel with the first layer, of course, dried. And it looks great in there. It's all lit up and there's a hint of the blue and the paint job around there, but we're not finished yet with the painting. So pretty much all there was to do now was another layer of resin and then put it all together.
Yeah, I wanted to try the resin in with the cabinet vertical because it pulled a little bit on some of the very steep sections. So I wanted to try that. And that all went very well, but I did learn that you can't do resin in patches. You do have to do it in the whole thing. So it does bunch up a little bit. Once you put it on the entire surface, it just sort of self-levels and comes to a natural finish. Whereas if you try and do it in patches, you do end up with a few sort of drips and blobs.
So would you say you're finished with the resin, or did you just have to draw the line somewhere to... Are you going to come back to it?
I am going to come back to it in probably about a month or 6 weeks, just after it's been used for some time, and probably put it back on its back and do another complete resin coat, and that should make it like a boiled sweet. It should look really good.
Well, I think it's probably time to reveal it to you. There's a few last tiny little jobs that we had to do before we can do that, including putting the electronics in, which was a Mr. Multi-System.
Yes. Using the composite output and going into a BVM broadcast monitor. It was one of the BBC ones that we got, so it was a really nice, good quality monitor. It is a colour monitor, so it does mean you have the shadow mask there, but actually it still looks pretty good in black and white mode. In the original computer space, the cabinet, the TV is actually really short-necked, and it's very hard to get that. So you'll notice that the bezel around the front is actually slightly shallower than in the real one. So we had to do that to fit our TV in.
Similar problem with the Sprint 2 restoration, just trying to source black and white TV, shallow black and white TV. That's another restoration for another day. Let's finish this one up with some high-tech things such as a biscuit tin.
Biscuit tin, yeah. It's really interesting that in the computer spaces, they seem to use an old thinner tin, which was just a metal tin that they could actually get out from the front of that front panel to actually get the coins out. So I used a biscuit tin, which is sympathetic. And
then around the back, just to give you an example of Richard's attention to detail, Dan made us a serial number plate to go on the back, which proudly displays the archive name and says that it's a replica. But you've seen a little detail on some computer spaces, haven't you?
They were all sort of affixed onto the back of that cabinet in various different ways, but most of them have brass nails, and almost all of the ones I've seen have got a bent brass nail. So most have got two. They sort of seem to get the top two in, the bottom two they always bend. So I really wanted to, it had to fight hard my willingness to actually put faults into this machine, but it needed them because the way the cabinets are built. So I did put some bent nails in.
Even bent the nails.
Yeah, adding that fiberglass and painting over the top of it looks just like a real computer space. So it has no structural effect whatsoever, but it just gives it that extra special look.
And then we could wheel it into the arcade archive proper. And here Richard comes with it on the trolley, nearly smashing it into the wall as he turns the corner. Thank goodness he didn't damage it. And we decided to position it here right next to Pong, of course, the first really successful arcade machine, commercially available arcade machine. And, well, just look at it. It's Richard. You're happy with it? I'm
delighted. It looks so good. It's the first time it's actually been that close to Pong, and that was what I used to get all of my measurements from. So yeah, seeing them so close together, and 1971, 1972, those two machines, it really is the start of our arcade journey.
And with the lights low and the spotlights on it, the glitter really does its job. It does, like you say, look like a boiled sweet. It looks so shiny. It looks incredible. And there's a real experience to be had here by visitors in that it's actually a pretty horrible game to play. Here you can see the gameplay footage here. I mean, let's be slightly forgiving because it's 1971. You know, it really is a pioneer. But this is a game that feels, when I say horrible, I mean it feels unfair. I think that's what I mean.
It definitely does. You find yourself getting killed by your own bullets, and you find yourself spawning onto the screen just where an enemy is, so then you get killed straight away, and sometimes it kills you just because it wants to. So it's very, very unfair.
It feels a little bit like Asteroids. You can see elements of that. Of course, it's based on the earlier, is it Space War that it's based on from the mainframes before it, with elements removed. We won't go too much into the detail of how the game plays, other than to say as an experience for someone coming to the Arcade Archive, you get frustrated with it. You understand why it wasn't commercially successful.
Yes.
And then you step one cabinet to the left and you're playing Pong head to head with your friend. And I think that's where the laughter begins and the frustration lifts, and you say, this is why it was successful. I understand that. And that's a really important lesson that we can teach people. We don't need a real computer space to do that. We've got a replica that immerses you and makes you feel that, and makes you feel the frustration, but also appreciate how beautiful it is, and that it's the start of an industry. And then learn your next lesson from Pong, and then the next cabinet, and then you work your way around the archives. That was really important to me, and I think that's what you set out to do from the start.
Yeah, definitely. From the first moment you walk up to it, you have to put a coin in. We've made it coin operated, so you put the coin in, you hear the coin fall into the biscuit tin, and then you start the game, and you immediately hear the sound effects, the booms. You'll get killed straight away, so you'll hear the big boom, and then you'll fight with the controls because everything seems a bit backwards. So left and right is in the middle on your right-hand side, whereas every other arcade machine, the joystick or the buttons for asteroids, it was always on the left. So you have to fight yourself quite hard to use those action buttons on the left and the controls on the right. So yeah, I think they learnt a lot from that. And of course they learnt that fiberglass cabinets probably just cost a bit too much money and took too long.
And the height of it, I had to get myself a stool. Because
yeah, it's perfect size for me.
It's awkward height. Next to Pong, they're about the same height, but then the monitor is at a different angle. I had to stoop, so I got myself a stool and was able to play it better that way. We have also shared this briefly with other people. We had a patron day the week before you got the final resin layer on, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And we let them play it because the control panel was working, the innards were working. And it was quite astonishing, the reaction to it. You can see some people playing it here, some of our official cave dwellers and Arcadians, including young Ruben, who came along and was desperate to get on the camera. So hi, Ruben. Thank you for taking part in this video.
Thanks so much.
And there was a queue out the door of the workshop of people wanting to play a 50-year-old arcade game.
Yeah, it was still cobbled together at that point. We got everything up and running, but it wasn't all completely finished. The control panel was working, but you could still come up, put the coin in, get that experience. We had the music up really loud, sound effects, so everyone had a really good time just playing it and getting onto level 2, which was really nice, just seeing those different levels. Something that made me really happy was Patrick in the comments last time on the first video actually released a scan that he did of Computer Space arcade cabinet, and we used that to compare against the Sculpt, which was really nice. So I actually found out that I did a reasonably good job of sculpting that. And there's a few differences though. The control panel's a little bit lower on the original, so I think that was probably from the parallax of me taking the shots and extruding them out. Maybe the camera where they took those shots were on a different angle. But I got the sculpt pretty much spot on really on the sides, and the height's about right. Little bit difference on the base, so I think we stick out tiny bit more. But yeah, it looks pretty good. So thank you very much. By the time you watch this, they will be all uploaded to printables, and you'll be able to use them as a single model or every one of the layers and every one of the sections. So all those 89 sections, if you really want to print one out, you can do exactly what we've done.
You had some feedback asking about your design process, and some people saying your choice of CAD packages and your tool chain looked perhaps overly complex. Do you have anything to say about that?
Not really, no. That was probably the fastest part of the entire process. So doing the CAD, I've thought about this for 2 years, and we talked about doing scans of the machine. Actually, I should have just got on with it, because that design flow of actually getting the pictures, modeling them, extruding them, and then doing the mesh modeling to get a nice smooth surface was very, very quick. So that was actually the quickest part of this entire build. So I think I always recommend whatever CAD packages get you to your finished result. So I've used probably 100 different CAD packages over the time, and yeah, whatever gets you there. Got the job done.
Well, you can see all of that in part 1. And thank you again to Richard. You've done an incredible job on this.
Thank you. It was really good fun.
Thank you to Richard. Thank you to Heber. Head to retrocollective.co.uk and you can click on shop and see many other things that Richard and Heber design and add them to your collection. A few things to come soon, aren't there?
Yes, definitely. We were right on the transition point of new technology that we were going to put into this machine, but we're a little bit off yet. But yeah, a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be having some new products out in the shop.
You can go to retrocollective.co.uk, you can see when we're open, and come and enjoy computer space for yourself. It really is quite an experience. And thank you as always for taking the time to watch. We hope to see you here soon.
Lost on level 1.
I did go and get school.
Cool.